everybody. Welcome to Terror Talk.
Welcome to Terror Talk.
So serious.
What if we were that serious every week?
Welcome to psychology and boring you to
Today, the DSM, neurodevelopmental disorders.
Page 43.
Oh, God.
I mean, maybe
just put me out of my misery.
Some people maybe might think we're that boring. I don't know.
It would just be like a book on tape. We just read all the criteria.
Today on the show, we're going to talk about the Deliverance, the Lee Daniels movie from 2024, but we're also going to talk about mostly about the true crime, whatever, the paranormal story that
Paranormal crime.
There you go, paranormal terror that happens. This was based on. Obviously, this is not a documentary. This is not a quote unquote necessarily a true story, but it's like there's a lot of things that are based on or inspired by, actually, is I think the words they use. So the Deliverance is this character, Ebony Jackson, who's played by Andra Day, a struggling single mother fighting her personal demons, moves her family into a new home for a fresh start. But when the strange occurrences inside the home raise the suspicions of CPS, or Child Protective Services, things go poorly. And Grandma lives there too, played by Glenn Close. And Omar Epps is in this. Monique is in this. She plays the CPS worker, the social worker from CPS that's trying to help Andra's character, Ebony, to keep her kids, basically. I enjoyed the watch. I enjoyed this movie.
I enjoyed this movie a lot more than I thought I was. I didn't know if it was going to be, not that I mind a slow burn, but sometimes these possession movies have just been like, there's so many of them that I was just beyond pleasantly surprised at how much it captivated me.
I think I would argue it's because the acting was so good.
Oh my God. I mean, Andra Day and Glenn Close, everybody was great in it, but those two and the kids, it was like watching, I forgot I was watching a movie. It just was like someone was telling me a story. It was so easy to feel like you were there.
Yeah, I think Lee Daniels is a great filmmaker.
He is.
I don't know necessarily if horror is ever going to be really his thing, but I did really appreciate this movie, mostly because I think that I've watched a lot of possession movies and a lot of exorcism movies and all that kind of thing, and it took a very unique, more religious. If I'm saying the possession was more, the exorcism was more religious than normal, like, it was really religious.
Well, I watched an interview on MSNBC, I think it was on Morning Joe, with Andra Day and Lee Daniels, and they went into that a lot. So I think this was a very, very personal piece for Lee Daniels, because he
went very Christian with it.
He's a religious guy.
Yep.
Yeah, and they both talked about their relationship with God, and so obviously I think that was apparent watching this.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I'm saying, is that for those of you who may have grown up in any semblance of Christianity or Catholicism or any kind of church, you're going to see a lot of things that will resonate with you or that will look familiar, all the way up to, and I will not give it away, but the ending of this movie is incredibly steeped in religious tradition. I grew up in a religious situation to some extent for a few years. You know how people do that. They go in and out. But so I was exposed to a lot of different kinds of things. And I don't know, I was just like, oh, looky there. It just looked really familiar.
Oh, yeah.
And so the belief system, like you said, which is, thank you for that, because it's very obvious. And so it's different. It's still a possession movie. It's still a horror movie. There are still horrifying parts, Glenn Close being one of them. There's still all the things that a possession movie, all the tropes, the climbing up the walls and all the things. So it's got all those things. So if you like that, you don't need to care about the religious part of it, but you'll see. And you can always blame it on the family, because the family believes in that. And there's a preacher, a female preacher, that comes and helps them, and so it's just a piece of the story. But it is inspired by a true story, the true story of Latoya Ammons. In November 2011, Ammons, her mother, and these 3 kids moved into this rental house in Gary, Indiana. And I can't help but want to sing that song.
I know. I was singing it in my head.
The Gary, Indiana song, which we will not sing right now.
Yes.
Otherwise, we will definitely get stuck.
And if you haven't seen The Music Man,
go for it.
Or not.
Yeah. Ammons and her mother, Rosa Campbell, reported hearing footsteps going up the basement stairs after midnight and the creak of the door opening between the basement and the kitchen. One night, Campbell recounted waking up to see a shadowy figure of a man pacing in her living room. When she got up to investigate, she discovered large, wet boot prints on the floor, but no one was there. This is not normal. And there's some quotes around things like, we killed them and killed them and killed them, but they kept coming back, meaning like they were fighting off ghosts or fighting off paranormal figures and things like that. And that is represented in the movie. Like they dramatize that. And so that's a really interesting part of this. Kind of like when you watch The Conjuring and, there's something there and the family is fighting this physical entity. So there's a lot of that in the movie too, but they needed a lot of help. But the thing is that these kids were having medical issues, psychological issues. They were acting out in school. One of the kids, I think, shit himself in class or something. There's all these stories around what was going on with the kids, and they would show up with bruises, and there was this and that. Now, this CPS worker, just as we would in those experiences, most likely, is we would say these kids are being abused.
Right.
Because one, they're harmed, there are physical injuries. Two, trauma often has you act out in school and have issues with urination, excreting, and all of those things, and functioning and the way you dress and whether you're on time, and it's like from big to small issues. Those are kids with trauma. So CPS is involved and going to take the kids away, and ultimately, I believe, did take the kids away for a while. She ended up getting her kids back about like a year later. But so the story in this movie is really, there's the CPS workers played by Monique, there's the mom, there's the grandma, there's the kids, there's the ex, there's all of that happening. It's very much a domestic story, all the while this family is having these paranormal, these ghosty, demony experiences. And so that makes it a kind of a fun movie.
Yeah, with or without the true story.
Yeah, with or without this true story. In 2012, the family visited their physician, and Ammons explained to the doctor all these things that were going on, and these bizarre things really that were going on. And there was a family that had lived in the house before them that had issues, but not like this. They had moved out. They talked about in the medical notes about how Ammons had, delusions, quote unquote, that there was a ghost in the home, that they were having hallucinations, that the mom was delusional. I mean, this is, all the stuff that had her have her kids taken away, and all the injuries and all these different things. And so there's a ton of interesting story around, DCFS and how they can't go on. They're going to say you don't have a sound mind, that you're not of sound mind to be taking care of your kids. And so that's, of course, what ended up happening. But there are all these reports, like the 7-year-old that we were talking about that had issues with excreting in his classroom, had these, he would go into these weird voices and say things like, I'm going to kill you and it's time to die, but it wasn't his voice. Things that we would see in the movies. And then there are recounts of like the kids having weird grins and walking up walls. And the CPS worker to this day says that she saw the boy walk backwards up the wall and stuff like that. But there are also recounts, and there are also reports of it was all made up for the money. It was all made up for the sensationalism, that they were going to make money from making the house a haunted house, and but I'm like, it was a rental house.
Well, I have some information. You may have this, but information about the homeowner.
Yes.
And are you going to go there?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So the haunted Carolina Street home was originally owned by Charles Reed, and Reed told the Indie Star that he had never experienced any issues before or after the family lived there. However, he did admit that he was less skeptical once he heard about the Catholic Church's involvement. So in 2014, a host and executive producer of the Travel Channel, Ghost Adventures.
I'm going to talk about that.
Okay. So purchased the home. I'll let Shannon talk about that. He had a different experience.
Yep.
And so, again, is this Charles Reed, the original owner? Was it him basically just not having access to that type of energy and never experienced it, or never entertained it, or never opened it? Or maybe he didn't want the negative press and he wanted to sell the home, so he never said anything? Or is it that, Zak Bagans from Ghost Adventures lied about it, but with what he did with the house, I would imagine he didn't. So I don't know if you want to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely where I was going to go. I did want to say just a couple more things about what they experienced, and just a few things. It's like a swarm of black flies in the winter, footsteps climbing up the basement stairs, children levitating and speaking in strange voices. So there was all these kinds of things. And then in 2012, this local reverend performed 3 different exorcisms, and they eventually moved out in November of 2012, and then mom regained custody around that time. So yeah, there's this documentary, you guys. You should really watch it. I've seen it a couple times. It's called Demon House, and it's from 2019, and it's Zak Bagans
I think I've
documentary.
seen this.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. So what he did, like Cathy said, is he bought this house. Zak has done all these seasons of Ghost Adventures and all of this, and so he's kind of droll, actually.
Yeah, he is.
He's not exactly the most fascinating person to watch, so set that aside for a moment.
He's like an old white man, isn't he?
Yeah. No, he's not old at all.
Oh.
He's
no. I know who you're talking about with the glasses.
Yeah,
but he is kind of flat.
He's just sort of flat.
Yeah.
So my first review of this would be that, like, he just sounds pretty tired in this whole thing, and I get why he was, because he probably did all the voiceovers and stuff after he went through this experience.
Yeah.
And whether you believe it or not, it looks tiring. He's kind of dull. He's a sort of a dull person. But, he starts out the documentary with his voiceover sort of saying, like, this is the case that really fucked me up. Like, out of all the hundreds of things that I've done with this kind of stuff, that he felt like, he says something like, this was some serious shit that meant something. So that's, his pithy, you're not going to get any, like, amazing conclusions.
Yeah.
This is serious shit that meant something is about all you're going to get from Zak. But,
Oh, that's funny.
Believes the story is cursed, believe the house is cursed. And I've seen this documentary, and throughout this documentary, what you see, him buying this house and him and his crew going to this house and staying in it and being in it and tape recording in it, and then also interviewing the family that lived there before the Amons family, and then that family having all sorts of issues. One of the daughters tries to kill herself 3 days after being in the house, and this is all the story that's within this documentary. So whatever you think of this sort of bullshit, so to speak, because many of you would watch this and go, okay, this is some hot garbage, because it's literally... You see the crew like become overtaken by the demons and have mental breakdowns in the house, and then in the hotel hallway you see Zak become possessed while in the house and attack his cameraman.
Oh, boy.
It reads like a found footage movie.
Yeah. I think I've seen this.
But it's not being shot like a found footage fiction. He's saying this all really happened, and that he's never been the same, and that he has an eye condition now because of something that happens in the, like, there's a lot.
Do we have a drama button music for dramatic music?
Yeah. It's the interviews with the previous family are really interesting, and then of course they absolutely tell all sorts of stories about how, after they went to the house with Zak, that like the number 6 came up on the kid's skin, and there's person from the original story, I think it's like a brother or an uncle, that agrees to talk to them and go to the house, and then the original family, the Amons family or somebody, I lose track of who's who, won't let this uncle or cousin or whoever it is back in their home because he's been to the house.
Got it.
So they truly, truly, truly believe that when you go in this house, you get possessed. And so then Zak carries on and becomes possessed, and so does his film crew, and we're off to the Blair Witch Project.
Okay.
And
The
there's this
Blair
guy,
Witch
I know,
Project.
there's this guy named Barney. I think his name is Barry Taff, who's in this. And he comes to the house. He's a very well-known dude, that paranormal dude that is one of those guys that's been debunked 112 times. And so at one point they bring Barry in. Barry, of course, has an experience.
Oh, they all do.
You know, and then goes to the hospital and says all of his organs have failed. Please, it's very entertaining. If you believe this kind of thing and you believe them hook, line, and sinker, you'll have a great time watching it because you get a lot of shit going on. If you think it's all hot garbage and that it's ridiculous, you'll also have a good time because it's all there and you just sort of laugh and go, yeah, okay. Do we trust any of you? No, we don't trust any of you.
Yeah.
Zach and Barry and Bobo and everybody who's having big fits. Now, here's the thing. But that relates back to this family that lived there before, the Amons family, and all their stories all the way throughout this. I don't know what happened to them. There's a lot of, as with, last week with the cryptids, there's a lot of eyewitness testimony.
Yeah.
That's basically your word against somebody else's, just like with Bigfoot or anybody else, Well,
and room for interpretation and all these things.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what's up. You got anything else to say?
No, I mean, I think that some of the best, when I watch movies like this, knowing that they come from true stories, obviously, you have to take whatever's there that can make a film and then make it your own. I'm aware that even the end of the movie is quite different from what the real accounts are and all that.
Yeah, sure.
But I think that taking something like this that Lee Daniels did and making it into like this psychodrama, I thought it was very powerful. And I do recommend the film even if possession films are not your thing. Like, I'm kind of hit or miss with them, hot and cold about them, and I really loved this movie. So
yeah, like I think you can take that into account. Those of you who listen to our horror stuff, you know that I love religious horror, possession, exorcism type stuff. So I tend to find something interesting in every single one. But Cathy, that's not as much of her.
I love it or hate it.
It's not really as much of her subgenre that she loves. So the fact that you liked it is really cool.
Yeah.
I think it speaks to the action. There's a bunch of like shit that happens, horror stuff that happens. If it kicks in,
if possession horror is done well, which, we've talked on another episode about how I'm in love with the series Evil and how they really need to pick someone up for season 5 because I've pretty much finished it.
Yeah.
And it's
you're like, come on.
I mean, everybody. Stephen King is like, why are we stopping this series? That I think when it's done right, it really captivates you. And this movie did that for me.
I think that's awesome. It's got a lot of really mixed reviews. So I wonder what you all think of it. And I also wonder, do you believe the Amon story? Because there's a lot of dissension around it. There's a lot of people saying, oh, well, they admitted it was just for the money on tape, or they admitted this or they admitted that. In Zak's things, he shows footage from the CPS worker and all of that, and it seems like she truly believed, and she saw stuff. It wasn't just the family that was saying they saw stuff. So, the CPS worker was saying that they saw stuff and all of that, and then this other family that goes in, like, who knows? Again, you just never know people's motivations and what's going on behind the scenes and who's paying who and all of that. But it's a hilarious documentary.
I think I've seen at least parts of it.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So I recommend watching that for the reasons I stated before. And it sounds like The Deliverance is a good watch too. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Terror Talk. We very much appreciate you. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Cathy. Sleep safe, everyone.